Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. I'm happy to report that I recorded a 2 hour and I think almost 2.5 hour long episode with Andrew Heaton, as I had mentioned before. But I think we're going to release that in parts, at least I will, because the first part is more about concrete events that's happening right now in Russia, about Russian economy and all this, about how Libertarian Party and retailers are being blamed for their inflation. And the second part was more philosophical discussion about politics and in Europe and the United States, all that stuff. But I also need to catch you up on the news and the important events, especially from, the Vatnik perspective, because, every day that I don't make an episode about this is a day where something else happens and then it all piles up. And, by the way, I have to say that I am now working on another article for Foreign Policy magazine because they were interested in me actually writing about this Kartapolov law, which is just amazing, which is just something I didn't expect, but hey, I'm going to be working on that as well. Oh yeah, and before we start all this stuff, the usual stuff, if you want to support the show, please go to patreon.com/theeasternborder or click the donate button on our homepage, theeasternborder.lv, or over there we have the pinned link to our merch store, where you can also become a member if you don't like Patreon, and you can just get all the cool t-shirts, mugs, and all this whatnot. Currently, we're about to introduce a new thing because after the conspiracy theory episode, now I guess axolotls are spirit animals. So we're working on bringing you a very special, limited edition axolotl t-shirts, Soviet axolotl t-shirts. They're going to be a bit weird, but they're coming pretty soon, and well, check it out in a couple of days. I'll be talking about this a bit later. But yeah, again, thanks to everyone who supports the show. Thanks to all of you who are patrons. And now let's get on with the whole information thing. See, the most important thing before I made the last episode to this one is the exchange of, Russian murderers and spies for, weirdly enough, Russian political prisoners. This is, interestingly, one of the very few cases where one country's citizens have been exchanged for other citizens of the same country, and it is a mess. And the press conference that these political prisoners held was also a bit weird, but I'll get deeper into that later. It's 2:30 a.m. here as I'm recording this, and my wife isn't happy. But I just wanted to show you some reactions there because there's something that really matters to us. Because globally, in general, the Z community reacted quite positively to the exchange of these murderers and spies for political prisoners, seeing in this a confirmation of the propaganda slogan that they don't amend their own. However, there were exceptions, and these exceptions are important, and I'll start with the most important one. With Girkin's wife. Yes, that Girkin who's now in prison, and his wife had the following to say. Quote, "Against the backdrop of the release of Yashin Karamurza, recognized as foreign agents, and others, I have once again become convinced that it is much more profitable and safer to be a Russophobe and a bastard in the Russian Federation." Well, obviously, and always has been. That's my commentary on this one. And then she says, "All the news now is about the exchange of imprisoned liberals. While the exchange of traitors to the motherland is taking place, the patriot of his country and military officer Igor Strelkov remains in prison. And even then, in this situation, he continues to ask to go to the front to serve his fatherland. Well, despite all the injustice of this, my husband's steadfastness and loyalty to the ideals evoke a feeling of pride. I think that only those who are ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of the motherland are worthy of remaining in history." And, I kind of don't understand why would anyone trade these prisoners for Girkin, but I'd like to ask, where exactly does she want Girkin to go out from prison? To Ukraine? To Hague? To where? That was a weird thing because, it's a weird situation where she flexed like that because it seems to be that she's just using this whole methodology, but that was quite confusing where you understand that Girkin has nowhere to go because he'll be jailed in every other country too. The neo-Nazis from the Sharga Rusic also were kind of angry because if you remember, their guy was arrested in Finland, and they, by the way, said to the Russian government that they won't fight until the guy from Finland who just went there and is a blatant neo-Nazi would get released. He never was. But they still, continued fighting, although they kind of announced that they would be like not doing it. But, neo-Nazis are always quite fucked up and dumb, especially when they're this hostile to every reason whatsoever. So they, of course, complained that it wasn't their guy that was exchanged. And they complained about a person that had arrived back to Russia from this. Quote, meanwhile, they previously commented about their guy not being released and everything. They read, meanwhile, a small-time hacker thief, Roman Seleznyov, who never served his country and was only engaged in personal enrichment, and then in quotes here, he was, like in brackets, he was arrested in the Maldives, where he went on vacation with prostitutes, is returning to Russia from the United States. It's not surprising. His dad has been sitting in the State Duma for 17 years and probably put all his resources into saving his son. Because, no one cares about the Rusic people. Alex Parker returns comments on the very same person, because he's associated with this guy, and these people commenting on all this, because Alex Parker returns also was very loud about getting the super neo-Nazi from Finland. But he writes, quote, on the subject of the previous hacker guy, quote, this is a man who spent his entire life stealing money from other people's credit cards, mainly American ones, and even became a victim of the terrorist attack in Marrakesh in 2011 when 17 people died and a huge number were injured in an explosion in a cafe. Roman's head was broken there, and after coma and difficult operations, he miraculously survived. The Americans finally got to the seasoned swindler and crook and sentenced him to 16 years in prison. It would seem Russia does not care about its own? No, it does. Because his father is a State Duma deputy, which means we really don't abandon our own and all that. Anton Medvedchuk, but very much on the minimum. Here, crook who stole money from American credit cards came to meet Putin personally. Now we've seen everything. Because, they were disappointed about this, but obviously, only if you're a son of some sort of important person or Putin likes you personally, then you would be exchanged. Now, Kartopolov law was just accepted in the second readings, and now they're hoping that it will be signed. But it's not the fact that suddenly they've shut up about this. I think they've been told to finally, keep quiet on this situation because information really doesn't need to go out there. Only Prizrak Novorossiysk paid attention to the fact that this was approved by the Federation Council. But they still complain about things because there's a new problem, in fact, regularly recurring, with a newly introduced another ban, on the use of civilian transport. Yes, civilian transport to the front is literally all logistics without exception, from the evacuation of the wounded to the delivery of food and ammunition. And this is, again, super confusing. Quote, two majors write, immediately from the Zaporizhia and Donetsk directions, there are reports on orders received either to immediately punish for traveling on non-statutory transport, or, these armored or transport military cars will no longer be issued for the so-called civilian transport. This decision is on paper. Once again, it's not responding to the developing situation. It was probably provoked by 2 or 3 screw-ups of individual idiots in the past couple of weeks. Of course, the frontline soldiers are worried about how to move now and how to deliver ammunition and provisions to the positions in the front lines. Not on huge Urals, which will immediately become an easy target for all Ukrainian weapons. We will note that such total bans in the form of orders for the military police are received regularly. Then, of course, conflicts arise, reaching the high command, after which everything comes to naught again. Therefore, comrade frontline soldiers, if once again in the balance of military discipline and reports there was imbalance, we urge you to treat this philosophically as a phenomenon of tides, as a ban of phones. Personally, commanders in all levels have been banning them and personal transport for us for 20 years already. And in defense of the Russian military police, despite the completely natural and often justified hate directed at them, we will say not a single commander has ever forced vodka on a frontline soldier. Another person, No Pasaran, said that this had touched him personally. Quote, they tried to take away my comrade's motorcycle. My comrade is a serious guy, a lieutenant colonel, a scout, a Siberian, a volunteer since 2014. Of course he didn't give up the motorcycle. But that's not the point. They take it away from other fighters and mass. And without a motorcycle, it's pretty shitty on the front line right now. You have to move around very quickly during rotations. Literally, they don't give a shit. They're confiscating motorcycles and cars and mass in a bunch, and all on verbal orders. So you see, it's not just the smartphones that are getting hit. It's just that, whenever you want to confiscate something and make something look very much weird, then obviously you have to figure out how to ban something to make everything more horrible for the people in the front line. Because, of course, why would they bother about caring about all the frontliners? And again, sorry if I sound a bit chaotic right now. Again, it's very late right now, but I really needed to put this out. Otherwise, tomorrow I will have insanely long episodes, which I kind of don't want. But yeah, this is now getting more attention than the smartphones, because I think that'll come back when Putin finally signs it into law. Some, by the way, these people that write about this situation add that the knocked up drivers, they're caught with driving a civilian car, well, they will be used to make up these meat assault units. The problem, again, like I told you, is not a new one. They write about this confiscation of transport for the third year now, but it's just they have to do this, and they get these cars because in the zone of action of FPV drones, you can't really move larger vehicles. They're easy to spot and burn. So they're just confused about what they're supposed to do. And meanwhile, they also can't complain because Kartapolov's law, but it's just totally weird. Call signed Ossetin comments the following. From tomorrow in the Kherson region, and more precisely in the Kherson direction, all soldiers will be confiscated their civilian transports. And what does this mean? It means that at each post, the military police will take away soldiers' cars that were given to them by humanitarian aid, which they bought with their own money, which they, tossed cash in together to purchase with all their platoon and company. When the commandants are fucks, I can answer for my words, all the soldiers support me, then it really happens. I do not understand how the commandant, a native of the Lviv region, because obviously everywhere Ukrainian trail, imagines it. Of course, in the rear you can drive a Ural with Kamazes, but when you are ahead, you can't roll them out. And not like we have a lot of them. And they're also in massive short supply. And yes, if there is no military police in the front, or just how will the cars get there? Their cars. I don't blame the military police themselves. It's clear that this is an order from above which they must fulfill. But come on, gentlemen. Welcome to the nearest checkpoint of Krinky pickup cars there. Just use the military ones, and after one flight you'll change your mind. This is a direct criminal order, which could be issued only by a rear cretin who has never been anywhere except Skadovsk and Genichevsk. I urge you, comrades, to think over your order and listen to the military, not to fuck knows who, and to the political officers. So, yeah, I guess Russian government has mostly figured out the whole strength of Russian military. See, other militaries give equipment to their soldiers. Russian military is busy taking everything they have away from them, which I find kind of strange. But again, obviously, this is going to be executed when it's pushed when someone's pushed to do it, or whenever a commander wants to, take a car away. That's just crazy. Two Majors right. By the way, I wonder whether the military counterintelligence will check the commandant mentioned by call-signed Ossetin, who comes from Lviv region. It looks like skillfully covered sabotage and actions to reduce the combat effectiveness of active units. This is just insane. Verum Regnum, a very interestingly named channel, right? Today, fighters with similar complaints got in touch with me. They tried to have their personal transportation taken away from them. Transportation without the use of which combat work will be impossible to perform. The latest initiatives of the civilian and military leadership cause more and more bewilderment and uncomfortable questions. Like, who are we fighting with? I'm more surprised because this shows that even if you're given a direct order from your military police, you might not enjoy it. But, they just disobey this stuff. And the morale is definitely not something nice going on there. Which kind of makes sense because a lot of people sort of either want to go home, because I believe at this point, and I mentioned this to Heathen as well, there's no chance of the war just petering out in a way. But not a huge chance, but there is a chance that this whole thing is just going to end kind of like COVID did when the war started. Now, I'm not sure that's the best way how this whole stuff could end, but it could happen. And one of the reasons is because if the West don't give enough support to Ukraine for Ukraine to win, then Russia won't be able to push through anyways because they have insane amount of problems. So it's just going to be like weird situation. I'm afraid of that because that would mean another freezing of the whole conflict, and that won't give you a permanent peace. That will just give you preparation time for future, which Putin is going to use, but we're going to forget. But the argument for all this stuff is, for example, why Putin does not really want to put in more soldiers there than necessary. Because these Z channels, the other thing besides cars, because Kartopolov law, it kind of broke down. I'm still following it because I want to know how this finishes, but they spoke about these cars. But right now they've started to discuss various ways to make up for these quote-unquote excessive losses and at the same time avoid the second wave of mobilization. These ways, all of them seem ineffective to the authors. They now all talk, because these guys are the most fanatical and they really, just want the war to happen. They're beginning to demand more and more mobilized people, even though the average Russian currently hates mobilization, hates war and everything more than ever before. The channel, Two Majors, writes, against the background of news about the doubling of the amount to volunteers for contracting with the Russian armed forces, he's talking about payment, on the federal and already increasing these same payments for a number of regions, many people forgot to emphasize that in this way the country's leadership is taking measures not to announce the so-called second wave of mobilization. It is just not planned. Because Two Majors are complaining about this fact that, they have the wrong nation there, because more and more also there are messages about how they just don't think that the average Russian really wants to fight, and that's true. Volt 8 writes, Volt 8, by the way, really just wants to go home. He's one of the weirdest people out there. And he writes about an interesting situation there where it's not only the people from the front line, not only people from just the outside who are forced to sign contracts, it's also mobilized and everyone else, they impact all the situation there. But he writes about an interesting thing which really shows how stuff's going on, because these guys are all very pro-Russian, let me remind you that. But this Volt 8 guy who's mobilized himself, he writes, quote, the most dangerous thing in the current approach to replenishing losses is cannibalism with regard to fire support and rear area units and regiments, as well as in a broader sense in various branches and types of the armed forces. Not only are the infantry distinguishably undertrained, but veterans who have survived more than 2 and 3 assaults are being just knocked out. There is loss of combat effectiveness per se in battalions. But you add to this the sucking out of qualified tankmen, artillerymen, mortarmen, communications and supply and repairmen, and you have a regiment's combat capability going down. Now add to this the hunting in platoons of assault platoons of guards and specialists in training centers of space forces, air force, all sorts of radars, strategic missile forces, supply and railway workers, as well as fleets, including unnecessary ones in the floating staff. And then you have the overall combat effectiveness of the Army and Navy going downhill. See, what they're doing there right now is that they're pulling off everyone who's working in the rear in some sort of thing that's not exactly kind of related to the Ukraine war at this given moment, and they're just pulling them and giving them guns and sending them to the front line. They're pulling off mechanical engineers from ships, people from the Air Force, who just normally would repair planes. No, everyone whose ties in the military, who's working for the military, you have now been sent to just do all this stuff. Training is just going down because they don't want to do the mobilization, which is normal, because I don't want to spoil the episode with Heaton, but I explain exactly why this is happening, because they can't do another mobilization, but what they're doing here is just worsening their situation of why they can't have mobilization. It's an interesting situation there, but you're going to have to wait for that episode for that to happen. Soldiers Pravda writes, multiple increases in contract payments, active recruitment advertising, SMS invitations to contract service in the Ministry of Defense, all of which suggests that the flow of volunteers is declining, and all that's needed, just to make strictly fixed terms on contracts, to return the former limiting age of service and to eliminate lawlessness of the ground. And he's now just saying what should be needed to be done to actually get people to volunteer. Put in the torture pits not those who belong in hospitals, but those who send them to storm assault units. to meat assaults. And then the volunteers will come. No, they won't. And their quality will increase. No, it won't. Not only those who have nothing to lose, and it makes no difference to them that they have just only a one-way ticket there, but also those who have still plans for their lives. They will all go to front. The problem is Russian government will never do anything of that sort. It's quite obvious. Because they're just not interested in that. They're not trying to managing their political situation. It really just stuns me still how they can have two different Russias, apparently, while fighting for the same goal. And sadly, Viktor Alksnis, who's a Latvian of Siberian descent, doesn't speak Latvian, is a communist, he writes and makes it clear how this whole thing seems to be turning out. Quote, "It seems that due to the large losses of our grouping in the Special Military Operations Zone and the lack of volunteers who are going to serve in the army under contract, a decision has been made to replenish the ranks of grouping with manpower by any means. What in particular is evidenced by the sharp increase in payment for enrollment in contact service to 1.5 to 2 million rubles. And the Kremlin is afraid to go for a new mobilization, fearing a sharp negative reaction to it from Russian society. But," he concludes, "to all appearances, it's becoming more and more inevitable every day." Now, to Viktor Alksnis, I have to say, it's inevitable only if you presume that Putin wants to win, not just, make things happen. Because it would be the most unpopular decision ever. But to understand more of that, the reasons are mostly economical. You'll have to wait until my episode with Heaton comes out. But I'll be checking up on news as well. So, for now, до свидания, товарищи. And I just needed to get these 20 minutes of news stuff out of the way. I'm working on especially commenting on the political prisoners who were released and their weirdness and everything. But for now, happiness is mandatory.